Declaro abierta la sesión.
The 10,167th meeting of the Security Council is called to order.
En el orden del día.
The provisional agenda for this meeting is Central African Region. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite Ms. Marta Ama Akia Pobi, Assistant Secretary General at the Departments of Political and Peace-Building Affairs and Peace Operations, to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of Item 2 of the agenda. I wish to draw to the attention of Council members document S/2026/445. That is the report of the Secretary General on the situation in Central Africa and the activities of the United Nations Regional Office for Central Africa. I now give the floor to Ms. Marta Ama Akia Pobi.
Madam President, Excellencies, distinguished members of the Security Council, it is an honor for me to brief you on the situation in Central Africa and the activities of the United Nations Regional Office for Central Africa, further to the report of the Secretary General as contained in document S/2026/445. Since our last briefing, the sub-region has passed important milestones. These included the holding of critical elections and progress in institutional reforms. The main sub-regional organization, the Economic Community of Central African States, ECAS, has shown encouraging signs of its deep commitment to sustaining peace in the sub-region. Yet these achievements have unfolded against a troubling backdrop. This includes the deepening multidimensional security and humanitarian crises. Socio-economic pressures and, most worryingly, restrictions to civil and political rights have increased. In September 2025, ECAS leaders appointed Ezekiel Nibigira as president of the ECAS Commission. Earlier this year, they appointed the commissioners of the sub-regional organization. We welcome these appointments and look forward to a strong partnership with ECAS, which is vital to helping Central Africa address its challenges. The United Nations, through UNOCA, is determined to continue to support the peace and security initiatives of ECAS and the capacities of the Commission. I would like to use this opportunity to acknowledge and welcome the development by the ECAS Commission of its ambitious draft strategic plan for the period 2026 to 2030. The Commission presented the draft strategic plan to partners for their feedback last month. It is important that this plan is given adequate and predictable support to translate regional commitments into concrete measures. At the end of last month, Burundi hosted the 61st session of the United Nations Standing Advisory Committee on Security Questions in Central Africa. This important forum remains a unique framework for dialogue and consultation within the peace and security architecture of the sub-region. We welcome the adoption of two important declarations on the strengthening of regional conflict prevention mechanisms and on the protection of internally displaced persons in Central Africa. Madam President, security remains a key concern in several countries of the sub-region. Two fulcrums of instability stand out in Central Africa: Eastern Chad and the Lake Chad region. With the conflict in the Sudan in its fourth year, its direct impact on Chad cannot be overemphasized. The influx of over 900,000 Sudanese refugees and 300,000 Chadian returnees, including over 800,000 children, since April 2023, has placed a significant strain on national resources. It has undermined social cohesion in Chad's eastern provinces, exacerbating an already severe humanitarian crisis. Repeated cross-border incursions and drone strikes on Chadian military positions risk a further regionalization of the conflict. We call again on all partners to increase their efforts to resolve the conflict in the Sudan and to help Chad in dealing with the impact of the crisis. In the Lake Chad Basin, civilians in Cameroon and Chad continue to suffer indiscriminate attacks and human rights abuses by the various Boko Haram-affiliated and splinter groups. The persistence of those groups stems from their ability to operate across borders, exploiting the limited presence of state authorities and services in those areas. The Multinational Joint Task Force remains an essential cross-regional mechanism to combat the violent extremist threat in the Lake Chad Basin. I am encouraged by the declarations of renewed commitment by President Mahamat Idris Deby Itno of Chad and President Bola Tinubu of Nigeria to strengthen security cooperation. However, while necessary, a security-focused response alone will not suffice to address the root causes of the crisis. I echo the Secretary General's call for international partners, including multilateral development banks, to fund the Lake Chad Basin Commission's cross-border programs within the framework of its regional strategy for stabilization, recovery, and resilience. Indeed, they remain under-resourced despite the growing humanitarian and protection needs in the region. UNOCA and the United Nations Office for West Africa and the Sahel, as members of the Steering Committee of the Regional Strategy, will continue to contribute towards its implementation. Finally, the ongoing crisis in the northwest and southwest regions of Cameroon continues to have a major humanitarian impact on civilians who bear the brunt of the violence of armed separatist groups. I reiterate the availability of the United Nations to supporting inclusive, nationally led initiatives to achieve durable peace and stability. Madam President, there is a worrying trend of increasing restrictions on civil and political rights in several parts of Central Africa. If not reversed, these could contribute to a narrowing civic space, affecting long-term stability and leading to conflict. In Chad, the sentencing of prominent opposition leaders to prison terms reinforced grievances linked to the conviction of former transition Prime Minister Sucé Masra. In Cameroon, extensions of the mandates of deputies and municipal councillors and the reintroduction of the position of vice president have been widely contested by opposition parties and civil society. In Gabon, restrictions on access to social media, a controversial law on nationality, and the arrest and pre-trial detention of opposition figure and former Prime Minister Alain Claude Bilibanze have been widely criticized by various sectors of Gabonese society. In the Republic of the Congo, the presidential election in March led to the expression of grievances by the opposition regarding electoral governance. As Sao Tome and Principe prepares for presidential election in July and legislative and local elections in September, it will be essential that electoral management bodies, including the Constitutional Court, be perceived as strictly impartial and independent. This should enhance acceptance of the results of the elections. It will be key to preserving stability and public confidence in state institutions. All these developments warrant intensified good offices to encourage and support inclusive political processes. Madam President, we are concerned about the Ebola outbreak in the Eastern Democratic Republic of the Congo and the risk of it spreading to the sub-region. As mentioned by the Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator Tom Fletcher, these are some of the most difficult operating environments in the world for life-saving work by the humanitarian community. Access and freedom of movement for healthcare and humanitarian actors are essential for an effective response. Regional coordination and greater international support will be essential to contain the spread of the outbreak. Madam President, UNOCA remains deeply committed to working with all regional actors towards conflict prevention, mediation, and peace consolidation. The Secretary General has recently appointed Mr. Mohamed El Amin Souef of the Comoros as his new special representative for Central Africa and the head of UNOCA. Mr. Souef is expected to deploy to Libreville towards the end of this month. We count on the continued support of this Council. I thank you for your attention.
Doy las gracias.
I thank Ms. Pobe for her briefing. I now give the floor to those council members who wish to make statements. I give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. And thank you to Assistant Secretary General Pobe for your briefing on both the progress and the challenges in the Central African region. Today, I will make 4 points focused on the Ebola outbreak, climate security, the situation in Cameroon, and the impact of the Sudan conflict. President, the UK is deeply concerned about the Ebola outbreak in Eastern DRC and neighbouring countries. The conflict in Eastern DRC makes the Ebola response harder. We urge all parties and the international community to work together to curb the outbreak. The United Kingdom has allocated over $26 million in new funding for the World Health Organization, the UN, and other international partners to strengthen disease surveillance, support frontline health workers, improve infection prevention and control, and help affected communities access life-saving care. Second, the United Kingdom welcomes the launch of UNOCA's Climate, Peace and Security Strategy. Climate change continues to compound insecurity and displacement in the Central Africa region. We welcome UNOCA's cooperation with ECAS and the UN Climate Security Mechanism to develop a new strategy for addressing the impact of climate change. We urge swift implementation of the strategy to improve early warning and conflict-sensitive responses. Third, we encourage greater efforts to address violence and terrorism in the region. The United Kingdom is concerned by continuing violence and insecurity in the northwest and southwest regions of Cameroon, with civilians continuing to bear the brunt of the conflict. We welcome UNOCA's efforts to support dialogue and urge sustained engagement towards a peaceful, Cameroonian-led solution. We also encourage further regional cooperation to tackle threats from Boko Haram and the Islamic State West Africa province in the Lake Chad Basin. We note the work of the multinational joint task force in improving security in Cameroon's far north. Fourth, and finally, as the Secretary General's report made clear, the Sudan conflict is having a destabilizing impact on the Central Africa region. This includes driving displacement and humanitarian need. We particularly commend Chad's efforts in hosting refugees fleeing violence. At the recent International Sudan Conference, the UK announced £146 million to support frontline aid workers, providing life-saving support to Sudanese people. President, the United Kingdom remains committed to supporting the Central Africa region. Thank you.
Doy las gracias.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom, and I now give the floor to the representative of France. Thank you, Madam President. I wish to thank Assistant Secretary General for Africa, Ms. Poby, for her briefing. Madam President, France hails the work of the United Nations Office for Central Africa done to support the successful conduct of political processes in the states of the region. As has been recalled by the most recent report of the Secretary General, strengthening democratic governance and preserving fundamental freedoms are key factors in guaranteeing long-term stability. In this connection, open and inclusive political space must be maintained, and dialogue and respect for human rights must be prioritized. The fight against disinformation and the fight against hate speech are both crucial to guarantee proper high-quality civic debate. As has been quite rightly underscored by the Secretary-General in his report, that fight is the responsibility of states, and it must be waged in full compliance with the principles of proportionality and non-discrimination. President, the support given by the UN Office to peace and security initiatives remains crucial in a context of persistent regional security threats. This support makes it possible to bolster cooperation, to tackle transnational terrorism-related threats, to tackle threats linked to maritime insecurity, or those linked to conflicts produced by transhumance or climate change. France welcomes the renewed commitment of both Chad and Nigeria within the multinational joint task force to address attacks in the Lake Chad Basin waged by Boko Haram and Islamic State West Africa Province, ISWAP. The technical support of the United Nations Office for these efforts by states in the region, as well as support provided to foster peaceful cross-boundary pastoralism and transhumance, must be encouraged. This cooperation is all the more important given that Central Africa is threatened by destabilization arising from the situation in Sudan and East DRC. The conflicts in Sudan is having a direct impact on the CAR and Chad. Incidents on the border have been on the rise since the beginning of the year. The influx of refugees is worsening the humanitarian situation of people present and is spiking into communal tensions in these two countries. At the same time, resources available for international aid are already under great strain. The continued conflict in the eastern DRC threatens both the stability and prosperity in the Great Lakes region. Warring parties must comply with Resolution 2773 of this Council. That resolution calls for the immediate cessation of hostilities, the withdrawal of the RDF from Congolese territory, the cessation of Rwandan support for M23, and the neutralization of the FDLR by the DRC. It is incumbent upon this Council to step up efforts to address these conflicts and to preserve stability in the region as a whole. Madam President, whether or not the United Nations Office proves useful is tied fully to its capacity to strive alongside regional organizations to prevent conflicts. This office has mobilized with France's support to integrate climate-related activities into activities designed to bolster peace and security in Central Africa. France welcomes the adoption by the UN Office together with ECAS of a regional strategy in this area. Now this strategy must be implemented. We must see the implementation of priority activities identified in terms of early warning, capacity building, regional cooperation, and community resilience. President, to conclude, France reiterates for all of the above reasons that it fully supports the United Nations Office. We hail the appointment of the new Special Representative, Mr. Mohamed Souef. We wish him every success as he discharges his mandate. Thank you.
Doy las gracias al representante.
I thank the representative of France. I now give the floor to the representative of Latvia.
Thank you, Madam President. And I thank Assistant Secretary General Poby for her briefing. As the Secretary General report details, the Central African region continues to face multiple challenges. Madam President, I will speak on three of them today: insecurity, governance, and climate change. First, we regret that insecurity is still part of the lived experience of millions of people in the Central Africa region. The conflict in the Eastern Democratic Republic of the Congo and the very grave humanitarian situation is further complicated by the new Ebola outbreak. And we encourage the international community to continue supporting the affected communities to contain it. Central African Republic and Chad are experiencing increased humanitarian and security pressures from the conflict in Sudan. And cessation of violence and sustainable ceasefire is urgently needed for the Sudanese people and to contain a regional spillover. The Boko Haram and Islamic State West Africa province continue to pose threats in the Lake Chad basin. Sustained regional cooperation and support for the multinational joint task force is vital for an effective response. That said, we underline that any response to security challenges needs to prioritize the protection of civilians. International humanitarian law and human rights law must be respected at all times and by all. Second, Latvia is concerned by the challenges to democratic governance in parts of Central Africa, notably restrictions on civil and political rights. Respect for fundamental rights and freedoms, safeguarding of civic space, genuine political dialogue are essential for peaceful, inclusive, and sustainable development. However, democracy requires its consistent exercise and vigilance. We call on countries in the region, especially those entering electoral cycles, to ensure peaceful, free, and fair elections and continued strengthening of their democratic institutions and inclusive political dialogues. We underline that political processes and dialogues need to ensure full, equal, and meaningful participation of women, and that youth also are key stakeholders whose legitimate concerns should be addressed. Lastly, the adverse effects of climate change are starkly felt across Central Africa. Rural livelihoods are under pressure, intensifying risks of recruitment into armed groups. Competition over natural resources, land, and water drive tensions that can erupt into violence, as described in the Secretary-General's report. Climate change is contributing to local and regional instability and increasing humanitarian needs. And it is important to build resilience of communities in the region, including through climate-sensitive mediation and peace-building efforts. In this context, the launch of UNOCA's Climate, Peace and Security Strategy is a welcome development. And we encourage future UNOCA reporting to include updates on its implementation. In conclusion, Madam President, despite the challenges, we also see positive trends. Neighbors come together to tackle shared challenges. Mediation has generated peace gains. And to build on the positive, it is important to continue supporting the countries in the region with good officers, preventive diplomacy, capacity and technical support that UNOCA can offer, including in cooperation with regional and sub-regional organizations. And we welcome the appointment of the new SRSG SWEF and wish him the best success in this endeavor. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Latvia. I give the floor to the Russian Federation.
We thank Assistant Secretary General Mr. Poby for the briefing, and we welcome the appointment of Mohamed Swef as head of the United Nations Office for Central Africa and wish him every success in this post. Despite significant and sustained progress in establishing peace and stability and in economic and social development, the countries of the Central African sub-region continue facing a number of serious challenges and threats. In recent years, countering international terrorism has come to the fore in this part of Africa. The stability of the sub-region continues to be undermined by Boko Haram. Groups affiliated with ISIL are increasing their activity. the strengthening of the Islamic State in West Africa province negatively affects the situation in the Lake Chad Basin countries. Developments in the Eastern Democratic Republic of the Congo are also a cause for concern. Against the background of the deepening crisis in this country, the Allied Democratic Forces Group have become a serious regional threat. Overall, we are concerned by the continued mass relocation of foreign terrorist fighters to Africa from conflict zones. Russia will continue to counter these destructive tendencies in the region and to share with African partners its accumulated experience and expertise in counterterrorism, as well as providing assistance in strengthening security on the continent. We intend to continue providing advanced practices and implement joint projects directly on the ground. It is important to emphasize that the key factor in countering terrorism in Central Africa is, first and foremost, cooperation amongst the countries of the region themselves. We note the importance of continued cooperation amongst Central African states within the framework of the regional multinational forces. We support strengthening coordination in this format and ensuring its sustainable, predictable financing with international support. One of the significant regional security threats remains violence in the northwest and southwest of Cameroon. We advocate, above all, for addressing the root causes of instability of these areas through political means. Another serious challenge is the further deterioration of the already complex humanitarian situation in the sub-region. The number of refugees, internally displaced, and people in need of humanitarian assistance continue to grow. Clearly, this is largely linked to the ongoing bloody internal conflict in Sudan. Its cross-border humanitarian consequences are being felt by many Central African states. At the same time, international humanitarian funding for regional efforts to host refugees and meet basic needs is, quite to the contrary, steadily declining. We call for international solidarity with the region. It is no secret that one area where assistance is more needed now than ever is the reform of international financial institutions and restructuring of the external debt of African states. We are grateful to the UN Secretariat for keeping this issue in the focus of the attention of the international community. An additional socio-economic challenge for Central African states has been the consequences of aggressive actions by the United States and Israel against Iran. This situation once again demonstrated the urgent need to reformat the outdated and inherently neocolonial economic model governing the interactions between African natural resource exporting countries and international markets. All these challenges, however, have not diverted the sub-region from the path of sustainable national development and interstate cooperation. The countries know that they are fighting for their sovereignty and independence. With the support of our country, stabilization in the Central African Republic is successfully continuing. A historic milestone here on the path to finally overcoming the long-standing and bloody armed conflict in the CAR was the holding of general elections there. The history of UN peacekeeping success, one of the few in its Africa, was also expressed in the work of the UN mission in that country. We welcome the final completion of the transition period in Gabon, and we congratulate the people and leadership of the Republic of the Congo with the holding of presidential elections, and we wish Brazzaville further success. It is clear that the United Nations plays a special role in promoting comprehensive progress in the Central African sub-region, and we note the work of the United Nations Regional Office for Central Africa here. At the same time, we would like to emphasize that it's unacceptable to attempt to link the mandate of UNOCA with climate-related issues which are not on the Security Council's agenda. Issues of climate change adaptation and mitigation should be addressed by specialized bodies of the UN system. Russia will continue to support the activities of the office on its core issues in coordination with the states of Central Africa, regional mechanisms, and integration associations. I thank you for your attention.
Muchísimas gracias a la representante.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation. I now give the floor to the representative of Greece. Greece, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. I would like to thank Assistant Secretary General Pobi for her insightful briefing and to welcome the appointment of Mr. Mohamed Choueif as new SRSG for Central Africa and head of UNOCA. Madam President, I would like to make the following points. First, Greece commends UNOCA for the good offices and its continuous efforts in the Central Africa sub-region to support the promotion of political dialogue, inclusive governance, mediation, regional preventive diplomacy, and sustainable development. We welcome the progress and conclusion of important political transitions in several countries of the sub-region. Despite the positive trends, we share the concerns of the Secretary General about constrained political and civic space, the restrictions imposed on civil and political rights and the freedom of expression, and the urgent need to address disinformation, incitement and hate speech in parts of the region. We urge the new SRSG to continue the engagement of UNOCA with civil society, particularly women civil society leaders, in order to ensure the full, equal, meaningful and safe participation of women and youth in all political processes. Second, we are particularly alarmed by the worsening security dynamics and the fragile humanitarian conditions in Central Africa, caused by protracted conflicts, intercommunal violence over land and water access, food insecurity, the recent Ebola epidemic in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and climate shocks. These threats lead to further large-scale displacements and increase the number of people in need of urgent humanitarian assistance, especially in Chad, Cameroon, and the DRC. Third, we are deeply concerned about the effects of climate change and natural disasters on the regional stability in Central Africa, resulting in food and water insecurity, impacting the local rural economy and the security and stability of the sub-region. Unfortunately, women and girls are paying the heaviest price of conflicts and natural disasters. We therefore welcome the recent initiatives of UNOCA, partnered with other regional actors, to address the impact of climate change and to underscore the need for capacity building, regional cooperation, community resilience, sustainability, and climate finance mobilization. Fourth, on maritime security, despite the downward trend of the frequency of maritime incidents in the Gulf of Guinea, we note with great concern the security challenges caused by various cases of piracy and kidnappings at the beginning of the year. We welcome all regional efforts promoting maritime safety and security, and we commend UNOCA's commitment to support the implementation of the Yaoundé's architecture. Madam President, in conclusion, we encourage the new SRSG and UNOCA to continue their support and collaboration with the African Union, ECAS, ECOWAS, Lake Chad Basin Commission, Gulf of Guinea Commission, and other relevant stakeholders in order to effectively address challenges to peace, security, and development of the region. I thank you.
Muchas gracias.
I thank the representative of Greece. I now give the floor to the Democratic Republic of the Congo.
Madame la Présidente.
Madam President, it is my honor to make this statement on behalf of the eighth tree, namely Liberia, Somalia, and my own country, the Democratic Republic of the Congo. To start, let me say that the A3 are thanking the Assistant Secretary General Martha Pobi for a comprehensive briefing. We also welcome the nomination of the new Special Representative of the Secretary General for Central Africa and head of the Regional Office of the United Nations for Central Africa, UNOCA, Mr. Mohamed El-Amin Souef, and wish him every success as he discharges his important duties and reaffirm our support to the efforts made by UNOCA to promote preventive diplomacy, mediation, good offices, and regional cooperation in Central Africa. Madam President, the A3 note that despite the difficult regional context, the countries and the peoples of Central Africa continue showing resilience and commitment to peace and stability. We welcome the ongoing efforts to advance the political transition, strengthen government institutions, and to deepen regional cooperation. We also welcome the continued commitment of regional organizations, ECAS in particular, and cooperation between the United Nations and the African Union and the regional mechanisms so as to promote peace and security in the sub-region. In parallel, we remain deeply concerned by the continued threat from terrorism in the Lake Chad Basin, the recent attacks perpetrated by Boko Haram, and groups and affiliated groups in Cameroon and Chad show us that these groups continue presenting a serious threat for the civilian population, the authority of states, and regional stability. We welcome the constant commitment showed by the countries of the region to combat this threat and reaffirm our support to the multinational joint task force. We also underscore the importance of providing security responses to stabilization, recovery, development, and strengthening resilience efforts, which need to address the root causes of security and prevent the recruitment of the vulnerable people. The A3 are also concerned by the growing regional impact of the conflict in Sudan. Its consequences are increasingly felt beyond the borders of Sudan, and in particular in Chad. The refugee flows, cross-border security, attacks impacting border communities, and growing pressure on the local resources and host communities continues presenting considerable challenges. We welcome and applaud the generosity of Chad hosting a great number of refugees despite humanitarian and economic constraints. We call on the international community to provide greater support to Chad and to other impacted countries. We underscore, furthermore, the need to intensify the diplomatic efforts aimed at arriving at a peaceful settlement of the conflict in Sudan and at preventing it spreading further regionally. Madam President, the humanitarian situation in the entirety of the region of the Central Africa remains worrying. Millions of people continue facing displacement, food insecurity, epidemics, unlimited access to basic services. We are particularly concerned by the growing gap between the humanitarian needs and the available resources. At the time when humanitarian needs continue increasing, the lack of funding limits humanitarians and compels them to make difficult choices when it comes to providing assistance to the vulnerable people. We call on international partners to increase their support to humanitarian response efforts and to ensure that assistance reaches those people who need it most. The A3 underscore very strongly that real security and sustainable development are deeply interrelated in the sub-region. We're firmly convinced that lasting peace goes hand in hand with economic growth, as does progress happens in an environment which is safe and stable. It's important to integrate security measures, robust ones, with the creation of economic opportunities, education, and the provision of essential basic services. This way, we will release the full potential of our communities. Ultimately, regional resilience emerges when we promote security and development as two interrelated pillars which mutually strengthen each other and provide for a prosperous future. The A3 also would like to underscore the importance of women and youth in peace building and the prevention of conflicts. We welcome the efforts made in the entire sub-region so as to move forward the agenda of women, peace and security, and youth, peace and security, ensuring a meaningful participation of women and young people in political processes, peace building, and decision making. And it is essential to build resilient society and make sure that peace lasts. Finally, the A3 underscore the importance of sustained cooperation between the United Nations, the African Union, ECAS, the Lake Chad Basin Commission, and other regional organizations. The challenges that the Central Africa is facing are increasingly interconnected, and they require a coordinated response. And in this regard, we reiterate our support to the efforts made by preventive diplomacy and UNOCA mediation, and encourage the continuation of investing in conflict prevention approaches and peace building. The A3 remain convinced that dialogue, cooperation, and the responses provided by the Africans themselves, supported by international partners, are the effective pathway towards peace, security, and sustainable development in Central Africa. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. I now give the floor to China.
President, I thank ASG Pobi for her briefing. China welcomes the ESG's appointment of Mr. Al Amin as the new SISG for Central Africa and head of UNOCA, and looks forward to his early assumption of duties. I also take this opportunity to thank former SISG Abari for his contributions. China will continue to support the work of UNOCA and work together to promote peace, stability, development, and prosperity in Central Africa. I would like to share 3 points. First, it's imperative to advance inclusive political processes and safeguard overall regional stability. During the reporting period, countries in the region have made positive progress in advancing the domestic political processes. The Republic of the Congo successfully held presidential elections. Gabon completed its political transition. Chad continued to advance post-transition governance system building. And Sao Tome and Principe has actively pushed forward electoral preparations. These efforts demonstrate the willingness and abilities of regional countries and peoples to uphold political inclusiveness and internal stability. China supports the governments of Central African countries in continuing to heed the voices of their people, respect their will, improve their well-being, advance inclusive political dialogue and institutional development, and continuously strengthen national cohesion and governance effectiveness. China knows Cameroon's efforts to safeguard national unity and ethnic solidarity, and supports the Cameroonian government in resolving security challenges in its northwest and southwest through dialogue and in restoring comprehensive peace and stability as soon as possible. The international community should fully respect the sovereignty and leadership of regional countries and support them in carrying out dialogue consultation to advance political and peace processes so as to maintain domestic unity and regional stability. Second, it's imperative to strengthen counterterrorism coordination and cooperation and safeguard overall regional security due to factors such as complex ethnic tensions, weak economic foundations, and spillover from neighboring conflicts. Counterterrorism situation in Central Africa remains grim. Terrorists are still active in the Lake Chad Basin. Extremist groups such as Boko Haram continue with their attacks. These pose a serious threat to regional security. China supports strengthened coordination between UNOCA and regional organizations such as the Lake Chad Basin Commission in order to pool more resources and jointly address security challenges, including terrorism and transnational organized crime. The international community should increase technical and financial support earnestly to the multinational joint task force and help regional countries enhance their counterterrorism and border management and control capabilities. Third, it's imperative to enhance independent development abilities and maintain the region's overall growth. Development holds the key to all problems, and thus must be placed at the center of the regional agenda. The region is rich in labor and natural resources and has enormous development potential. The international community, especially the developed countries, should earnestly fulfill their commitments on development financing and increase investment in infrastructure, healthcare, humanitarian assistance, and other fields in Central Africa. They should support countries in the region in exploring development paths suited to their national conditions. International financial institutions and multilateral development banks should provide more long-term concessional financing for development to help regional countries better address debt and liquidity challenges and strengthen economic resilience. The pressing priority now is to jointly help DRC and neighboring countries to respond to the Ebola outbreak and keep people safe, healthy, and secure. President, China and African countries have long supported each other, engaged in mutual beneficial cooperation, and share a common future. Starting from May this year, China has implemented zero-tariff treatment for 53 African countries having diplomatic ties with China, injecting new momentum into China-Africa trade and investment cooperation and Africa's development. China actively supports regional countries in strengthening epidemic prevention and control, and has decided to provide emergency humanitarian assistance to countries stricken by Ebola, such as DRC. We have sent a team of experts to DRC to assist the medical services there. In addition to bilateral assistance, we have provided assistance to AU Commission. I have carried out epidemic prevention and control cooperation. We support the work of Africa CDC to jointly elevate the abilities of African countries to fight the epidemic. China firmly supports African countries in pursuing African solutions to African problems and stands ready to work with the rest of the international community to support regional countries embarking on a new development path featuring self-reliance and self-strengthening and make greater contribution to the realization of lasting peace and prosperity in Central Africa. I thank you.
I thank the representative of China. I now give the floor to the representative of Panama. Thank you very much, Madam President. I am grateful for the briefing given by the Assistant Secretary General, Marta Pobi. We wish to reiterate our gratitude for the work done by the UN Regional Office for Central Africa. The preventive role played by UNOCA remains essential in a region in which security, governance, and development challenges are increasingly interlinked. Panama notes with concern a regional trend marked by a reduction in civic space, increasing restrictions on political participation, and the curtailment of fundamental freedoms. Lasting stability cannot be built by viewing the situation through a security lens alone. It requires legitimate institutions, inclusive political processes, and absolute respect for the rule of law. We are particularly concerned by persistent violence in the northeast and southwest of Cameroon, as well as by the uptick in Boko Haram attacks in the Lake Chad Basin. Recent attacks in Chad, including that in Barca Tolorom, demonstrate that extremist groups continue to adapt their tactics and that they retain significant operational capacity. Against that backdrop, we fully support the strengthening of both the multinational joint task force and the regional strategy for stabilization of the Lake Chad Basin Commission. Particular emphasis must be given to the situation in one of the key host countries for refugees in the region. The war in Sudan continues to have destabilizing effects across the whole of Central Africa. More than 1 million Sudanese refugees are currently on Chadian territory. That is placing extraordinary pressure on already vulnerable communities and on a woefully underfinanced humanitarian response. Panama is equally concerned by the converging nature of the following: climate change, food insecurity, displacement, and community conflicts. Clashes between farmers and pastoralists worsened by environmental degradation and competition for increasingly scant resources are a growing risk for regional stability. We commend the launch of the Climate, Peace and Security Strategy by UNOCA and the Economic Community of Central African States. We also hail efforts made to develop regional early warning and community resilience mechanisms. Moreover, we recognize UNOCA's efforts to champion broader and more inclusive participation in conflict prevention and peace-building processes. The effective participation of women and young people must not be viewed as something that complements efforts to prevent conflict. Rather, it must be viewed as a vital prerequisite to achieve that goal. Finally, President Panama underscores the importance of strengthening cooperation between the United Nations, the African Union, ECAS, the Economic and Monetary Community of Central Africa, and sub-regional organizations. The challenges facing Central Africa, which include violent extremism, maritime insecurity in the Gulf of Guinea, humanitarian and climate crises, all demand coordinated, prevention-based and sustained responses. We reiterate once again our staunch support for UNOCA and for its preventive diplomacy mandate, as well as the mediation and early warning components of its mandate, because in an international context marked by manifold competing crises occurring at the same time, Central Africa must not become a forgotten crisis. Investment in prevention today will continue to stand as the most effective and least costly tool with which to preserve international peace and security tomorrow. Thank you.
Le doy las gracias.
I thank the representative of Panama. I now give the floor to Denmark.
Thank you, Madam President. Let me also thank Assistant Secretary General Pope for her briefing and welcome the recent appointment of Mohamed El Amin Shuf as SRSG and head of UNOCA. We look forward to working with him. Madam President, allow me to make 3 points. First, Denmark is concerned by the worsening security situation in many parts of Central Africa. This includes violence in northwest and southwest regions of Cameroon, where attacks have led to significant civilian death and displacement. We are equally concerned by the reported activities of the Lord Resistance Army in the Central African Republic and the Democratic Republic of Congo, as well as the spillover of the conflicts in Sudan into Chad, which is driving large-scale displacement and creating acute humanitarian needs. Terrorist groups also continue to pose a real threat to regional stability, in particular through the use of drones and improvised explosive devices. However, we underline that any military operation to counter these threats must be conducted in full compliance with international humanitarian law and international human rights law. Civilians and civilian objects must never be targeted. Second, there have been various instances where opposition voices, civil society actors, journalists, and political critics face increasing intimidation and arrest. As we have heard, in Chad, the dissolution of an opposition coalition and the detention of political leaders raise concerns. In Gabon, new legal measures restricting online freedom and limited political participation risk fear and exclusion. We encourage all governments in the region to uphold constitutional order, protect civic space, ensure due process and respect for human rights, and create conditions for inclusive political participation. At the same time, we acknowledge the positive steps, including the conclusion of the political transition in Gabon and renewed preparation for election in Sao Tome and Principe. We also welcome efforts by these countries, as well as Equatorial Guinea, the Central African Republic, Chad, and others in the region to advance women, peace and security and implementation of Resolution 1325. Third, the impact of climate change are acutely felt in the region. Above average temperatures, erratic rainfall, and pressure on water, pasture, it's intensified existing challenges and heightened instability and communal violence. Denmark therefore welcomes the launch of the Regional Climate, Peace and Security Strategy for Central Africa,
which provide a much-needed operational framework for integrating climate-related risk into conflict prevention, early warning, and peace-building efforts. We acknowledge the work by UNOCA's climate security advisors and the climate security mechanism, along with the economic community of Central African states in developing this strategy. Furthermore, we welcome and encourage efforts by UNOCA and regional organizations to strengthen the participation of women mediators and local communities in early warning and climate-sensitive mediation. Madam President, in closing, Denmark remains steadfastly committed in our support to the work of UNOCA, and we will continue to be working with UNOCA as well as regional and international partners to support peace, protection of civilians, accountable governance, and climate resilience across Central Africa. I thank you.
I thank Denmark for that statement. I now give the floor to Pakistan.
Thank you, Madam President. I would like to thank ASG Martha Poby for her briefing, and we also thank the Secretary General for his latest report on the situation in Central Africa and the activities of UNOCA. I join colleagues also to congratulate Mr. Suef for his appointment as the new Special Representative and Head of UNOCA, and also take this opportunity to convey our appreciation to Mr. Abari for his invaluable contribution. Madam President, Pakistan has close friendly relations with countries of this region and has partnered them over the years to advance peace and development objectives, both bilaterally and as well as through the UN and its peacekeeping and peace-building activities. Pakistan therefore supports UNOCA's important role in preventive diplomacy, early warning, and promoting regional cooperation. We commend its continued partnership with the Economic Community of Central African States, the Lake Chad Basin Commission, and the African Union in advancing peace and stability in this region. Madam President, according to the SG's report, since the Council's last consideration, developments in Central African region reveal both progress and growing challenges. The region has made important strides in restoring constitutional order and advancing political transitions in several countries. The report also suggests that the challenges have evolved from managing transitions to consolidating institutions and ensuring that political progress delivers meaningful peace dividends. Security has become more fragile in some theaters. Spillover effects of the conflicts in the Sudan and Eastern DRC have become more pronounced. Terrorist threats in the Lake Chad Basin are more sophisticated, and humanitarian and socio-economic pressures are more acute. We note that last year, concerns centered primarily on humanitarian consequences and refugees, whereas now the spillover effects are increasingly manifest in regional political and security dynamics. These developments underscore the urgency of intensified diplomatic efforts to prevent further regionalization of these crises and advance peaceful political solutions. The resurgence of terrorist violence in the Lake Chad Basin, including the increasing sophistication of attacks and the use of drones by Boko Haram affiliated groups, is deeply concerning. We reiterate our support for strengthened regional counterterrorism cooperation through African-led mechanisms, particularly the Multinational Joint Task Force. Predictable, sustainable, and adequate financing for such regional initiatives remains essential. We also note the SG's observations regarding the growing socio-economic pressures confronting countries in Central Africa. Rising debt servicing obligations and tightening fiscal space are increasingly constraining the government's ability to invest in essential public services and social protections. At a time of heightened humanitarian needs and inflationary pressures, these challenges risk undermining hard-won gains in peace and stability. It is in this context that reform of the global financial architecture, greater access to affordable long-term development finance, and more responsive international financial arrangements will be important to support recovery, resilience, and nationally driven development priorities in Central Africa. This, Madam President, must be an integral part of the comprehensive approach built on the interlinkage between sustainable peace and development. I thank you.
Gracias.
I thank the representative of Pakistan. I now give the floor to the United States.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you, ASG POBI, for your informative briefing. We also welcome the appointment of the new SRSG for UNOCA, Mohammed El-Amin Suef. SRSG Suef, we look forward to working with you. The United States values our partnerships with member states across Central Africa, which support everything from mutual prosperity to greater peace and stability. As we have heard from ASG POBI, recent events demonstrate the vital importance of continued regional security cooperation. The United States condemns all violence perpetrated by Boko Haram, ISIS West Africa, and other terrorist groups that attack and displace civilians in the Lake Chad Basin region. Specifically, we condemn the May attacks conducted by Boko Haram in Chad and expressed our condolences to the families of the Chadian soldiers who were killed. The United States and Nigeria recently executed a meticulously planned, complex mission to eliminate Abu Bilal al-Manuki, the global ISIS second-in-command and one of the most active terrorists in the world. We encourage African partners' continued cooperation towards addressing these security challenges, and we champion your work to counter these threats. Turning to the Central African Republic, which I had the chance to personally visit in February, in Bangui, the capital, in Samwanja to look at MINUSCA's work, and just 60 kilometers from the Sudan border in Birao. We are encouraged by progress made towards the peace process and recognize MINUSCA's role in these developments. I want to credit the SRSG and her team for leading a strategic planning process that in many ways can serve and maybe should serve as a model for future missions. MINUSCA's success necessitates a reevaluation of the mission's posture as it consolidates gains and prepares to transition responsibilities to the CAR government. Long-term peace and security in CAR will require commitment from the CAR government to assume these responsibilities. Unfortunately, as has been mentioned here, challenges remain. The United States is deeply concerned about the ongoing impact of the Sudan crisis on the Sudanese people, as well as on the Central African Republic, Chad, and other neighboring states. We call on the Sudanese armed forces and the rapid support forces to agree to and comply with a humanitarian truce without preconditions to allow full, safe, and unhindered humanitarian access to those in need and to guarantee the safe passage of innocent civilians fleeing violence. Looking toward the future, Stability across Central Africa is inextricably linked to economic cooperation. Stronger partnerships, supported by mutually beneficial trade, investment, and commercial cooperation, are key to greater peace and prosperity across the region. The United States stands ready to support. I thank you.
I thank the United States for that statement. I now give the floor to Bahrain.
Thank you, Madam President. At the outset, I would like to express our appreciation to Mr. Abdo Abari, the former Special Representative of the Secretary General to Central Africa and the head of the United Nations Regional Office there. We thank him for the valuable contributions he has made to strengthening peace and security in Central Africa. We also welcome the appointment of Mr. Mohammed Al-Amin Suwaif as his successor, and we wish him success in his future endeavors. And we further thank Madam Martha Pilby, the Assistant Secretary General for Africa. We thank her for her comprehensive briefing. Madam President, we have taken note of the latest report of His Excellency the Secretary General on the challenges and opportunities in the Central African region. We affirm that consolidating the foundations of peace and security in the region requires continued joint efforts based on the following priorities. First, in the context of the political developments that the region is witnessing, reference must be made to the positive indicators noted in the Secretary General's report, be they in Cameroon or Gabon or the Republic of the Congo. Despite some of the security tensions that have accompanied them. Here, the Kingdom of Bahrain emphasizes that the success and the sustainability of the political transition is closely linked to having them based on consensus, respect for the sovereignty of states, and the non-interference in their internal affairs. The Kingdom of Bahrain also underscores the importance of prioritizing dialogue and constructive engagement among the different national stakeholders, as this is the best means to settle disputes and address existing challenges, which would achieve security, stability, and prosperity for the peoples of the region. Second, in light of the escalating security and humanitarian challenges in the Central African region, the Kingdom of Bahrain expresses its deep concern over the continued fragility of the security conditions and the resurgence of violent terrorism and violent extremism in some areas, as well as armed attacks and kidnapping operations, with special note towards the increasing activities of Boko Haram and the LRA. With the serious repercussions that these pose to the security and safety of the countries and the peoples of the region. The Kingdom of Bahrain condemns the terrorist attacks that target civilians and that undermine efforts to consolidate stability and security in the region. The Kingdom of Bahrain commends the regional efforts to combat terrorism and violence and extremism, including the support for the multinational Joint Task Force for the Lake Chad Basin and the coordination that it conducts with national counterterrorism strategies. Bahrain further supports disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration programs and supports the activation of preventive diplomacy to resolve emerging crises and limit their repercussions. Madam President, the worsening humanitarian conditions and the rising rates of displacement and migration resulting from these challenges poses an urgent need to strengthen regional cooperation to contain cross-border repercussions, especially those related to the situation in the Sudan. In this context, the Kingdom of Bahrain stresses the importance of supporting countries and communities hosting refugees and displaced persons and ensuring the delivery of humanitarian and relief assistance to those in need with no obstacles. The Kingdom of Bahrain also calls for building more effective and coordinated international and regional partnerships that combine sustainable financing, capacity building, and the exchange of expertise so as to enhance the efficiency of humanitarian response and to maintain regional peace and security. In closing, Madam President, the Kingdom of Bahrain commends the role that the United Nations Regional Office for Central Africa is playing. We affirm our continued support for its coordination efforts with regional organizations and mechanisms. The Kingdom of Bahrain values the office's efforts in cooperation with local initiatives in the fields of mediation, capacity building, and enhancing the participation of women and youth in shaping sustainable peace processes. I thank you.
Muchísimas gracias.
I thank the representative of Bahrain. I will now make a statement in my capacity as the representative of Colombia. I thank Ms. Mata Pobe, Assistant Secretary General for Central Africa. I thank her for presenting the report. Moreover, I wish to take this opportunity to wish every success to the recently appointed Special Representative of the Secretary General and Head of UNOCA, Mr. Mohamed El Amin Swef. Colombia takes note of the trends in the region of Central Africa as outlined in the report. We express our concern at the persistent violence and cross-border threats which are affecting security and stability both within and beyond the bounds of the sub-region. These situations have a disproportionate impact on the civilian population, particularly on women, children, and vulnerable communities. These challenges reaffirm the fact that peace and stability cannot be decoupled from sustainable development or from full respect for human rights. Consequently, it is vital to tackle the structural causes of conflicts. This through comprehensive and integrated responses as well as international cooperation. It is equally vital to promote inclusive and sustainable political processes rooted in dialogue, mediation, and the respect for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of states. Against this backdrop, I wish to underscore 3 points. First, Colombia urges states to protect and expand civic space and political pluralism in the sub-region. Democracy requires sustained, open, and inclusive processes beyond elections alone. Inclusive political dialogue contributes to conflict prevention and sustaining peace and security. In this endeavor, the full, effective, meaningful, and safe participation of women in decision-making processes, as well as in conflict resolution and peace-building processes, is vital. As such, we laud efforts made by countries in the region who are making headway with the implementation of Resolution 1325, including through the establishment and implementation of their national action plans. Secondly, Colombia expresses its concern at the humanitarian situation in Central Africa. It is alarming to note the way in which the lack of financing and insecurity are impediments to the rapid, safe, and sustained delivery of humanitarian assistance, including in a context of health emergencies. The constrained response to the outbreaks of Ebola and cholera lay bare the need to guarantee minimum security conditions. This in order to guarantee that the humanitarian response can arrive in a timely, unfettered fashion. The protection of both humanitarian personnel and affected communities must continue to remain a priority. My third point, in order to comprehensively tackle the causes of instability in the region, Colombia underscores the need to strengthen regional approaches to prevention and resilience in the face of the adverse effects of climate change. These approaches include the Climate, Peace and Security Strategy of UNOCA. Moreover, we reiterate the importance of mitigating the pressure brought to bear by external debt. This through the reform of the international financial architecture. The goal here should be to expand countries' fiscal space and to facilitate access to long-term financing, such as to foster investment focused on sustainable development. I now return to my functions as Security Council President.
No hay más oradores.
There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.